Have you ever been called a failure right after you built someone else's biggest success? I still remember that moment, like it happened just yesterday. The conference hall lights blazed brightly. Applause rolled through the room like crashing waves. On the giant screen behind the stage, our newly launched product was being celebrated as the best-selling breakthrough of the year. I stood among the crowd of employees, trying to make myself smaller, but my heart hammered so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I knew. I knew that product was my brainchild. From the first rough sketch to the final polished design, the sleepless nights, the endless revisions, the heated debates with the engineering team, all of it was being rewarded in that single moment. The CEO stepped onto the stage, grabbed the microphone, and started his speech. He beamed pride shining in his eyes as he praised the product's success. And when he paused to invite the product team on stage to receive acknowledgement, I caught sight of my direct manager, Mr. Walker, standing at the side. My heart tightened as I looked at him. While everyone else was glowing with pride, Walker just stood there, hands shoved into his pockets, wearing a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. When our gazes accidentally met, he gave me a curt nod, so brief, so cold. No encouraging wink, no genuine smile. I told myself he was just busy, but the pang in my chest was harder to ignore than I cared to admit. I tried to drown out the strange feeling with the thunderous applause filling the room. Maybe he's just tired. Maybe I'm overthinking. I repeated the excuse in my mind like a mantra, forcing myself to enjoy this moment of triumph, because I deserved this, because I had poured every ounce of strength, every breath into this project, because if I didn't allow myself to savor this pride, then what was the point of all those sacrifices? When it was my turn to step onto the stage, I moved with steady steps. I shook the CEO's hand. He grasped it tightly and leaned in to whisper, "Outstanding. Truly outstanding." I smiled a full, unguarded smile. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely embraced by the light. But just a second later, when I turned back toward the crowd, Walker's cold, distant stare locked onto mine again. A shiver slid down my spine. It felt like something was very wrong underneath all the applause. That evening, the celebration party was lively. Champagne glasses clinked. Laughter echoed against the walls. Colleagues came by, shaking my hand, praising the boldness of the idea, the beauty of the design. I laughed, I chatted, I toasted just like everyone else. But at one point, standing alone on the balcony with a half-empty glass of champagne in my hand, the cool night breeze brushing my skin, I exhaled a long, heavy breath. Beneath the surface of my pride, a vague anxiety was quietly growing inside me. Why do I feel so alone in my own victory? I stared down into my glass. The light from inside reflected off the golden liquid shimmering delicately. Beautiful, yes, but also so fragile, just like my place in the company. Glorious, radiant, but fragile enough to be blown away by the slightest gust. I tried to reassure myself, "It's okay. Everything will be fine." But deep down, I knew a storm was brewing silently, but surely. And just a few days later, that storm would hit in ways I never could have imagined. The Monday after the launch party should have felt like a coronation. I came into the office wearing my favorite blazer, the one I saved for special occasions. I even allowed myself a tiny smile as I passed the front desk, nodding at familiar faces. This was supposed to be the start of something new, something better. The project had been a hit. Our numbers were off the charts. I thought, maybe it was finally my time. I made my way to my desk, half expecting balloons, a card, even a casual, "good job" note. Instead, silence. No one even looked up when I walked in. A few heads were bowed low over keyboards. Some whispered, but the moment I stepped closer, the conversations died mid-sentence. I blinked, thrown off for a second. Maybe they're just busy. Big projects, tight deadlines, I told myself. But the longer I sat there, the clearer it became. Something had shifted. Confusion at first, then unease. It was like being locked out of a house you helped build. I was still sitting in the same chair, surrounded by the same people, but it didn't feel like home anymore. When lunchtime rolled around, I grabbed my sandwich and headed to the break room, hoping to shake off the awkwardness. Normally, a group from my team would be huddled around a table, joking about weekend plans, griping about deadlines. But today, the room was empty. Empty except for Walker. He was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. When he glanced up and saw me, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Annoyance? Contempt. Either way, he didn't say a word. He just pocketed his phone and brushed past me without so much as a nod. The air he left behind felt colder. What the hell is going on? I wondered, my appetite disappearing. It didn't make sense. Last week I was the star, the golden girl, the architect behind our biggest success. And now it was like everyone had been handed a script and my part had been erased. I spent the rest of the afternoon pretending to work my hands, hovering uselessly over the keyboard. At 3:47 p.m., an email popped up. Subject meeting request. Emily Carter. From Walker. No body text. No explanation. Just a meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning. Private in his office, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just the unexpectedness of it. It was the way the invite was worded. Cold formal Walker never scheduled meetings this way, not for casual check-ins or project updates. Something about it felt surgical, like a knife was already in motion, and I was about to find out where it would land. I sat there staring at my screen, the hum of the office fading into background noise. Maybe it's a promotion. Some naive part of me whispered, maybe he just wants to talk about next steps. But the smarter part of me, the part that had survived enough corporate games to recognize danger when it loomed, was already preparing for impact. I logged out early that day, citing headache as an excuse, but the real headache was the buzzing inside my chest. A low, constant static of anxiety I couldn't shake. As I walked through the Fallait parking lot, I noticed a cluster of my coworkers huddled by the side door. Their heads bent together, whispering, shooting quick glances toward me. When one of them caught my eye, she stiffened, gave a tight smile and turned away. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. These were the people I had pulled late nights with, the ones who had sent me funny memes at 2 a.m. to keep our spirits up during impossible deadlines. The ones who just last month had cheered me on when I pitched bold ideas in stiff boardrooms. Now, they couldn't even meet my eyes. They know something. I realized my throat tightening, and whatever it wasn't good. As I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary, I thought about the strange glances, the cold shoulders, the heavy silence. It all pointed in one direction. I wasn't being celebrated anymore. I was being isolated, set up, maybe even sacrificed. I leaned back against the seat, closing my eyes for a moment, breathing through the rising panic. You'll be fine. I lied to myself, just stay calm. See what he says tomorrow, you can handle it. But deep down, I already knew by the time that meeting ended, everything I thought I knew about my career here would be shattered. The next morning, I barely slept. I got to the office early, too early. The halls were still mostly empty, the air heavy with the smell of burnt coffee and fresh paper. I sat at my desk, pretending to review documents. I wasn't actually reading, my eyes darting to the clock every few minutes. 8:59 a.m. I smoothed my blazer, stood up, and walked the long hallway to Walker's office. Each step felt heavier than the last. I knocked lightly. "Come in," his voice called, clipped flat. I pushed the door open. Walker sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a laptop open in front of him, a legal pad placed precisely to the side. He didn't offer me a seat, didn't smile, just stared at me with an expression so blank it almost looked practiced. I hesitated, then sat down across from him, feeling the muscles in my back stiffen. He cleared his throat and spoke with no preamble. Emily, after a review of recent projects, upper management, and I have some concerns about your creative contributions. And it was like someone had sucker punched me straight in the gut. I blinked, I opened my mouth, then closed it again, because what could I possibly say to that? My creative contributions. Was he serious? He kept talking, voice low and even, like he was reading from a script. We believe your performance has plateaued. In particular, your recent work shows a lack of innovation and forward thinking that we expect at your level. My fingers gripped the armrests of the chair. Hard, the best-selling product you just launched. I thought wildly, the one setting company records, that was my work. My innovation, my blood sweat, and sleepless nights. But Walker didn't even flinch, didn't waver. He slid a folder across the desk toward me. Inside a list of recommendations for reassignment. Translation. They were moving me out of the design team, burying me somewhere irrelevant. A slow, ugly realization started clawing its way up through my chest. This wasn't a performance review, this was an execution. Why now, after everything? Part of me wanted to argue, wanted to throw the metrics and data in his face, wanted to remind him, and anyone who would listen, that the success he was now dismissing came from ideas he had once sneered at until they proved him wrong. But another part of me, a deeper, colder part, understood something else. This wasn't about my work. It had never been about my work. It was about something else. Politics power. A game I hadn't realized I was a pawn in until now. I swallowed hard and asked, "Can you give me specific examples of where you think my creativity has fallen short?" Walker leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He gave a small patronizing shrug. It's just a general sense, Emily. A feeling among leadership. Hard to quantify, you know. Hard to quantify a feeling. That's all it took, a feeling, to dismantle everything I had built. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. He wrapped it up quickly after that, dismissing me with a polite, clipped nod, already opening another file on his computer as I stood up. Just like that. Years of work. Years of loyalty, years of believing that talent and results would protect me gone with a few vague sentences and a manila folder. I stumbled back down the hallway like I was moving underwater. The walls seemed narrower, the air heavier. Coworkers avoided my gaze. Some even turned their backs when I passed. If there had been any doubt before it was gone now, they knew. They all knew. I made it back to my desk and sat down heavily, staring blankly at the screen. They're pushing me out. Not today, not officially. But soon, they would starve me of real work. They would isolate me until leaving felt like my own choice. And worst of all, if I left quietly, they could rewrite the story however they wanted. Emily just burned out. She wasn't keeping up anymore. She lost her edge. It made my stomach churn because it wasn't true. And because if I walked away without fighting, that lie would stick and grow. I wasn't ready to give them that satisfaction. Not yet. If they wanted a quiet exit, they were about to be very, very disappointed. The days that followed felt like moving through a ghost town that only I could see. At first, I tried to act normal, replying to emails quickly, offering ideas in meetings, volunteering for new assignments. But slowly, almost methodically, the walls began to close in. Every suggestion I made was put on hold. Every project I touched was quietly reassigned to someone else. Important meetings were scheduled without me, threads. I used to be CC'd on now, skipped my inbox entirely. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Worse than the silence was the glances. The way people looked away too quickly. When I passed or gave me those thin, pitying smiles. You give someone standing in the rain without an umbrella. At first I fought it. I asked questions. I offered help. I showed up early, stayed late, overcompensating for an accusation no one had officially made, but everyone seemed to believe. But it didn't matter. The more I tried, the faster they pulled away. It hurt more than I expected. I had always prided myself on being a team player, on building real connections beyond just deadlines and deliverables. Now it felt like I had been dropped on an island, waving frantically for a lifeboat that everyone else pretended not to see. The loneliness wasn't just professional, it was bone deep. It seeped into the way I carried myself, the way I hesitated before speaking up, the way I started second-guessing every move. One Thursday afternoon, I was sitting at my desk, pretending to be engrossed in a report no one had actually asked for, when I caught a familiar voice drifting from the hallway. It was Mark, a guy from marketing I used to collaborate with all the time. He was chatting with another team lead, his voice low but animated. They're grooming Alex to take over some of Emily's responsibilities. He said I froze Alex, 24 years old, fresh out of grad school, 2 internships under his belt, and somehow magically he was the one they wanted. Now I kept my eyes glued to my screen, heart hammering so loud I almost couldn't hear the rest. Walker says she's too set in her ways, not adaptable enough. Leadership wants fresh energy. Fresh energy. That was the code, wasn't it? Young, malleable, easier to control. My face burned with humiliation. I gripped the sides of my chair so tightly that my fingers went numb. After fighting tooth and nail to bring real innovation, real value to the company, I was being quietly erased, replaced by someone with a shinier resume and half my experience. And worse, they were rewriting the story as they went. It wasn't that I was being pushed out, it was that I had lost my edge. That narrative would stick like tar if I let it. For a few long minutes, I just sat there staring at the blinking cursor on my screen. Frozen. Part of me wanted to storm into Walker's office, slam the door. Demand answers, demand respect. But another part of me, the colder, sharper part, that had been forged during countless disappointments, knew better. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me, emotional, irrational. Easy to paint as difficult. No, if I was going to fight it, I had to be smarter than that. Smarter than them. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, laptop, open a blank Word document staring back at me. I started writing. I listed every project I had led over the past 2 years, every result I had delivered, every innovation that had come directly from my work. I pulled saved copies of email threads, screenshots, drafts. Anything that proved my value, my creativity in black and white. Not because I was planning to send it yet, not because I wanted a confrontation, but because I knew I needed armor. They had their story, I needed to be ready with mine. For the first time in days, I felt something stirring under the layers of hurt and anger. Not hope, not yet, but defiance. They could isolate me, they could freeze me out, but they couldn't erase the truth. Not if I refused to let them. I wasn't going to beg for scraps anymore. I wasn't going to plead for a seat at their shrinking table. If they wanted me gone, they were going to have to fight for it, and they had no idea how much fight I still had left, because the more they pushed me into a corner, the more dangerous I was becoming. And soon, I would find the proof I needed to turn the entire game against them. The investigation started small. I wasn't trying to dig up dirt. Not at first. I just wanted to understand what was happening to me, why everything that once made sense suddenly felt upside down. It began with casual conversations, the kind people don't realize they're having when they think no one's really listening. Lunchroom murmurs, Slack messages left half open on screens, the hurried way some people closed their laptops when I walked by. One evening, after most of the office had cleared out, I stayed behind. Not to work, to watch. I noticed that Alex, the shiny new recruit, kept slipping into Walker's office long after official meetings had ended. Short, informal chats. Laughs, handshakes. It was a relationship one built outside the rules in the quiet shadows where real deals happen. I felt a sour twist in my stomach. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a setup. The pieces clicked together faster than I wanted to admit. Walker wasn't simply pushing me aside because he doubted my creativity. He was making space, clearing a path for Alex. and someone much higher up was backing him. I sat frozen at my desk long after Alex finally left Walker's office that night. How long had this been happening? How many conversations had I missed? How many decisions had already been made behind my back? It wasn't about my work. It never had been. It was about connections. Politics deals made in closed rooms over drinks. I wasn't invited to share. And now they needed a reason to justify what they'd already decided. Lack of creativity. Such an easy, slippery excuse. Impossible to disprove. Convenient. The next day, fueled by a sharper, colder anger, I started going through old project files, emails, meeting notes, drafts. I remembered something a brainstorming session months ago. Alex had been invited to observe just a junior staffer, then supposedly learning the ropes. I had led that meeting, guiding the team through the breakthrough that eventually led to our record-smashing product. I dug through the archives and found the proof. My notes, my designs, my documented leadership on the project, and buried in an email chain, a forwarded message from Walker to leadership, praising my visionary approach, copied to Alex and a few others. A cold smile tugged at my mouth as I stared at the screen. Before the narrative had changed, they had acknowledged my role in writing. Part of me wanted to cry, not from sadness, but from sheer blinding frustration. I had been right all along. They weren't punishing me for failing. They were erasing me because I had succeeded without being one of them, because I had dared to rise higher than they were comfortable with. I realized then it didn't matter how much loyalty I had shown. It didn't matter how many wins I had delivered. In their eyes, I was not the right kind of winner, not young enough, not malleable enough, not willing enough to play the silent, grateful understudy. And because I wasn't what they wanted, they were rewriting the story without me. But now I had something they hadn't expected. Proof. I spent the rest of that night quietly compiling a private file. Emails, meeting notes, screenshots of messages where my contributions were acknowledged, praise celebrated before they decided I was no longer useful. It wasn't enough yet. Not for what I was planning, but it was a start. For the first time in weeks, I felt steadier. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't invisible. They thought they could erase me silently without resistance, but they were wrong. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to build my case slowly, carefully, and when the time was right, I was going to make sure that when the truth came out, it would be impossible to ignore. They wanted a scapegoat. They were about to get a storm. And deep down, I knew the real fight hadn't even started yet. After that night, something inside me shifted. I stopped trying to win them back, stopped wasting energy, smiling at people who had already made their choice. Instead, I worked in silence, calm, deliberate, invisible. Every day, while they thought I was fading into the background, I was gathering strength. I quietly downloaded backups of key documents onto a secure drive project, outlined signed approvals, early design files with my name on them. I collected screenshots of Slack messages and meeting transcripts where I had clearly contributed original ideas. No hacking, no tricks, just careful preservation of the truth, the same truth they were trying so hard to bury. I wasn't preparing for a confrontation. Not yet. I was preparing for war. It was a strange kind of grief moving through those days. Not sadness, not exactly. It was more like watching the slow death of something I had once loved. A team, a dream, a belief that hard work would protect me. I mourned the version of myself who had believed that being good was enough. But underneath that mourning was something else growing too. A fierce, steady resolve. I wasn't going to be the sacrificial lamb they expected. I wasn't going down quietly. At meetings, I smiled politely and said little. When Walker assigned me mindless busy work formatting documents, arranging brainstorming notes, I accepted without complaint. Every moment they thought I was giving up, I was filing another small piece of evidence away. Every meeting they left me out of, Every assignment stripped from me. Every backhanded comment, I was documenting all of it. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't dramatic. It was patient, quiet, relentless, and it was working. There were days when the weight of it nearly broke me. The loneliness was brutal. The injustice was suffocating. There were moments when I wanted to scream, to throw my resignation letter in Walker's face, to tell everyone exactly what was happening. But each time that urge flared up, I forced myself to wait, to breathe, to remember. They were counting on my anger to undo me. They were hoping I'd implode, lash out, give them a reason to paint me as unstable or difficult. So I kept my silence. For now, the old version of me would have fought back immediately. Loud, emotional, messy. But this version of me, the one forged through betrayal and isolation, was different. I didn't need to fight on their terms. I was going to hit them where they least expected it. And when I did, there would be no shouting, no scenes, no messy emotions for them to twist against me. Just facts, just proof, just the undeniable truth dropped like a stone into the center of their carefully constructed lie. By the end of that month, my private archive was complete. It was time to stop playing defense, time to set the next phase of my plan in motion. I reached out quietly to a few trusted contacts outside the company, people who knew my work, who had seen firsthand what I was capable of. I didn't tell them everything. Not yet, just enough to plant seeds, enough to remind them who I was, what I had done, and what I could do again somewhere new. And all the while inside the company, I kept playing my part. The fading employee, the forgotten one, the relic of old thinking. Let them underestimate me. It would make the strike land even harder. It's strange how freeing it felt, letting go of the need for their approval. For the first time in months, I wasn't chasing anything. Not acceptance, not validation. I was simply moving forward quietly, fiercely, and on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid anymore. Because the next time they tried to erase me, I'd be ready to show them just how unforgettable I could be. By the time spring crept in, the pieces were all on the board. My performance reviews were a joke, now short, dismissive meetings where Walker offered thinly veiled criticisms and half-hearted suggestions, like maybe find a mentor to reignite your creativity. I played along, nodding, jotting down fake notes, smiling in all the right places. It was almost funny watching them convince themselves I was slipping away quietly. But outside those walls, I was building something stronger. I started quietly taking meetings, coffee chats, virtual calls, casual lunches with people who mattered. Old clients who remembered the projects I'd led. Former coworkers who had left for better places and still spoke highly of my work. Recruiters who understood that what companies said they wanted in a resume and what they truly needed weren't always the same thing. I wasn't desperate. I wasn't begging for a rescue. I was interviewing them as much as they were interviewing me. At first, it felt strange, sneaky, almost disloyal. After all, for years, this company had been my home, my identity. Leaving had once felt unthinkable, like tearing myself away from my own reflection. But now it felt like shedding an old skin too tight, too suffocating to survive in anymore. With every conversation I had outside those gray walls, I felt lighter. Stronger. I wasn't the failure Walker wanted to paint me as. I wasn't obsolete. I was still me, and that was enough. The most surprising thing wasn't that other companies wanted to meet me. It was how fast they moved once they understood the situation. People remembered. They remembered the big wins I had delivered. They remembered the campaigns I had rescued, the designs that had turned into bestsellers, the solutions no one else could see until I built them from nothing. And slowly, steadily offers started to appear. Not pity offers, but real ones. Respectful, competitive opportunities that saw my value instead of trying to erase it. I kept everything quiet. Inside the office, I stayed invisible, arriving a little late, leaving a little early, never making waves. It wasn't cowardice. It was strategy. The quieter I stayed, the less they suspected. And I needed them unsuspecting for what came next. Because I wasn't just planning to leave, I was planning to make sure my departure left a mark, they couldn't ignore. There was a new fire in my chest now. Not rage that had burned out long ago. Not fear. I had stared fear in the face for too many nights already. This was something sharper. Cleaner purpose. I wasn't walking away because I lost. I was walking away because I chose to on my terms, in my timing, with my dignity intact. And when I went, I wasn't going alone. There's a quiet kind of power in knowing you've already won, even if nobody else sees it yet. Every fake smile I gave in meetings, every silent nod in the hallways, it wasn't defeat, it was patience. And patience, I had learned, was my deadliest weapon. Because while they wasted energy managing perceptions, building stories about my supposed decline, I was busy building my future. And when the time came, I would have more than just a new job. I would have proof. I would have witnesses. I would have the truth and all the leverage that came with it. The final piece slid into place late one Friday afternoon. An email popped into my inbox. A client contact I hadn't spoken to in months. One of the biggest names in our industry. Someone whose opinion could tilt the scales in any boardroom. They had heard through the grapevine that I might be looking. They were interested, very interested. They wanted me to come in, pitch a vision talk about leading a new division they were building from scratch. Fresh team, fresh start, fresh respect. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling the weight of everything I had been carrying finally start to lift. This was it. This was the exit ramp I had built for myself. Brick by painful brick. A slow smile broke across my face. The first real one in a long time. I wasn't stuck anymore. I wasn't trapped. The future was mine again. And soon, in one perfect public moment, they were going to find out exactly what happens when you bet against the wrong person. The day of the big meeting started like any other gray skies, stale coffee, the low buzz of forced small talk around the office. But for me, everything was sharper, more vivid. Like standing at the edge of something electric, I knew what was coming. They didn't. Walker had scheduled the meeting with a few key clients, the same clients whose accounts I had helped build from the ground up. The meeting was supposed to showcase new leadership, fresh ideas, all the corporate buzzwords they loved to throw around when they were quietly replacing someone. I was invited, of course. Token attendance, smile, sit quietly, fade into the background. That was the plan. At least their plan. As I walked into the conference room, laptop tucked under my arm, I felt a calmness settle over me. Not numbness, not detachment. Control. For the first time in months, I was the one holding the real power in the room, and they didn't even realize it yet. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the safe spot out of the line of fire, supposedly out of relevance. Perfect. I watched as Walker started the meeting, his voice full of fake enthusiasm. Selling the new creative direction to the clients, he praised the company's adaptability, the team's fresh energy, the exciting opportunities ahead. I waited, and then just as he clicked to the next slide, a showcase of our recent award-winning product, I struck, actually. I said, my voice clear but casual. Before we move forward, I just want to make sure we're giving credit where it's due. The room went still. Walker froze mid-sentence. The clients turned their heads toward me, surprised but curious. I opened my laptop, clicked a few times, and projected a folder onto the screen. Inside draft emails, meeting notes, design iterations, all with my name stamped across them. Clear documented proof that the success Walker was bragging about had been built by the person they were now trying to erase, me. It wasn't anger that filled me in that moment. It was something deeper, something cleaner. Vindication. For so long I had been carrying the weight of their lies, the slow, crushing sense that maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe I didn't belong. But standing there facing them down, with nothing but the truth on my side, I realized I had never been the problem. They were. Walker tried to recover, stammering something about team efforts and shared visions. But it was too late. The clients weren't stupid. They saw the dates, the signatures, the undeniable trail of where the real innovation had come from. And more importantly, they saw the way Walker flinched, the way he scrambled, the way the room's energy shifted subtly, but irrevocably away from him. I kept my voice even professional. I didn't gloat, didn't raise it even a fraction. I just think it's important, I said, smiling politely, that we all operate with transparency, especially when we're talking about the future. Silence thick heavy. The clients nodded slowly, exchanging looks among themselves. Walker sat down heavily in his chair, his face pale. The meeting dragged on after that, but the damage was done. No matter what spin he tried to put on it, the truth had already cracked the surface, and everyone could see it bleeding through. As I packed up my laptop at the end, Walker wouldn't even meet my eyes, and for the first time, I didn't feel small under his silence. I felt powerful. Because now, I wasn't just walking away from their narrative. I was walking away with my story intact, and a dozen witnesses who would remember exactly how it went down. It's a strange thing exposing the truth. It doesn't always come with fireworks or applause. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just the way someone looks at you differently. A flicker of recognition that you fought back when they expected you to fold. And sometimes that's more satisfying than any standing ovation. But even then, as I walked out of that glass-walled room, I knew the real payoff was still waiting just around the corner. By Monday morning, the shift was impossible to ignore. Emails that used to drip with forced politeness now came curt-clipped, almost panicked. Meetings that I was once casually excluded from suddenly had my name added last-minute, desperate attempts at damage control. Walker, for all his practiced arrogance, was unraveling. I could see it in this way he rushed through conversations, avoided eye contact, stumbled over the simplest updates the clients from Friday's meeting had followed up. And they weren't subtle about it. They wanted a full project breakdown, including who had contributed what. No more smoke, no more mirrors, watching it happen. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. This wasn't how I wanted it to end. Part of me had genuinely admired Walker. Once had believed in his leadership, had tried so hard to earn his respect. But when the mask falls off, sometimes you realize you weren't standing beside a mentor. You were standing beside a man who only looked strong because you were holding up part of the weight for him. And the moment you stepped back, he crumbled. It's a disorienting thing, seeing someone you feared look so small for so long. I had let his judgment shape how I saw myself, had let his coldness plant seeds of doubt in places where there should have been certainty. But now I saw him for what he really was. Not a gatekeeper, not an arbiter of talent, just a man scrambling to protect a story that was finally coming apart at the seams. Midweek, the CEO called an emergency leadership meeting. It was the first one I had been invited to in months. I walked into the conference room without flinching, this time, without scanning for allies or planning exits in my head. I didn't need an escape plan anymore. I had the truth and the calm that comes with it. The CEO opened the meeting with a tight smile, acknowledged the concerns raised by our biggest client, talked about the importance of accountability and transparency. Then, with a heavy pause, he turned toward Walker. "Would you like to explain," he said evenly, "how this miscommunication happened?" Walker stumbled over his words, offering vague excuses. Team effort, different stages of development, misunderstandings. But the CEO wasn't buying it. Neither was anyone else. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. There was a heaviness to it, standing there watching a man fall apart under the weight of his own choices. Victory didn't feel like a triumphant shout. It felt like a deep, steady exhale, a closing of a door that should have been shut a long time ago. Sometimes the people who try the hardest to diminish you are the ones who are most terrified of your light. They think if they cut you down, you'll shrink small enough to forget who you are. They never expect you to stand taller instead. And they certainly never expect you to stand still and let their own lies do the work of exposing them. By the time the meeting ended, it was clear to everyone that Walker's days were numbered. He didn't look at me when we filed out of the room. Didn't speak. Maybe he was hoping I'd still be the person who would stay quiet out of fear or misplaced loyalty. But that version of me was long gone, because I wasn't just walking away anymore. I was walking towards something better. something I had built for myself, and it was almost time to take the final step. 2 weeks later, I submitted my resignation. No drama, no shouting matches, just a short, clean letter delivered to HR with a quiet, steady hand. Walker wasn't in the room when I handed it over. He didn't even look at me when I passed him in the hallway afterward. I didn't need him to. The work was already done. The people who mattered, the clients, the external partners, even a few key executives knew exactly why I was leaving. And more importantly, they knew exactly who had built the success they had tried so hard to reassign. I spent my last few days tying up loose ends, leaving behind a trail that couldn't be twisted or erased. Walking out of that building for the final time, I thought I would feel grief. Instead, I felt weightless. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was freedom. Clean and sharp and undeniable. All the fear they had tried to trap me, in all the doubts they had tried to feed me, dissolved the second the glass doors closed behind me. I realized then the place wasn't what had given me value. It was never about the office or the title or the name on my paycheck. It was me. It had always been me, my creativity, my perseverance, my stubborn refusal to accept anything less than what I deserved. And no matter where I went next, those things would follow me. They were mine, and no one could take them away again. The very next Monday, I started my new job, fresh office, fresh team, fresh opportunity to build something from scratch without having to fight every inch of the way to be seen. My first day felt strange, almost surreal. No tension humming under the surface, no side glances or whispered warnings. Just a room full of people who seemed genuinely excited to have me there. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving. I was thriving. Sitting at my new desk, sunlight pouring through windows that actually opened. I smiled. Not a forced smile, a real one. I wasn't who I had been when I started this journey. Scared. Eager to please, desperate for validation. I was stronger now. Sharper, whole. Sometimes the worst betrayals don't break you. Sometimes they carve you into something more honest, more resilient, more you than you ever thought you could be. I didn't need to be afraid of starting over. Because I wasn't starting from nothing. I was starting from experience, from lessons earned the hard way. Yes, but earned all the same. And standing there looking out over a city full of endless possibilities, I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. Looking back, the hardest part was never the betrayal itself. It was the slow erosion of trust, the way doubt crept into the spaces where pride and purpose used to live. It was standing in rooms I had helped build, feeling invisible. It was realizing that no amount of hard work could protect you from people determined to rewrite your story. But what they tried to erase only made me stronger. They taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. That your worth isn't determined by who recognizes it. That even when the walls close in your light isn't extinguished, it just burns more fiercely. That sometimes losing a place you thought you needed is the first step toward finding the life you truly deserve. I walked away with more than a new job. I walked away with myself, whole, unbroken, and more certain of my voice than ever before. And maybe that's the real victory. Not proving them wrong, but proving to yourself that you were never wrong to believe in who you are. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside for shining too brightly, know this. Your story isn't over, it's just getting started. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after being underestimated? I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments. You never know who you might inspire.